So the purpose of today is to give you a bit of an update as to what GIRI is about. And although this is mainly for GIRI members, as Nick said, it is being recorded, and therefore it will be open to the wider world. So forgive me if one or two things you've heard before, but it's sort of partly for what we might do in the future. So we wanted to do this because we wanted to see just how we could spread the word about our training as well, which is why Nick is going to be taking a significant part in what we're doing, and why, and hopefully that will help us to spread the message about the training that we've been developing. So as I said, the purpose of today is members only update of what we're doing, how we're dealing with, in our own way, with COVID-19, and an example of the training that we might offer. Next slide, please. I'm sure we don't need reminding, but the key point that we're constantly addressing is that the research that we did is that we spend about 21% of our turnover in overcoming error in the UK. That's not a particularly unusual figure. The more we look into it, the more we find. And I was recently sent an article from America where they were talking about 17%, so in the same order of magnitude. So the whole industry worldwide seems to do a pretty bad job, basically. So anyway, so that's what we're about, and that's what we're continuing to and striving to deal with. Can I have the next slide, please? Again, the root causes, and I think it's just always worth reminding ourselves about this. I'm not going to read them all out. You've seen them all before. But a lot of it is to do with planning, design, culture. And one of the key things that we ought to be doing is how can we create a better culture to actually deliver the right qualities. Can I have the next slide, please? So the key aims of GIRI, as you know, is to improve construction productivity and quality by eliminating error. And the next slide, please. So our aims and objectives are to create a culture and a right working environment to get it right, change attitudes, engage stakeholders at every level, right the way through to try and make sure that we have the right quality, share knowledge about error reduction processes. And I think that's incredibly important. And the sad thing is that despite all that we try to do about sharing knowledge, we're still pretty good across the industry in making the same mistakes with boring repetition, basically. And then improve skills across the sector, creating a positive approach to preempting error, which is, again, a lot of the work that Nick has been doing with us. So the next slide, please. So clearly, we're all facing the challenges of COVID-19, lockdown. You guys who are closer to the industry than I am, are probably dealing with issues with sites being closed and all of that. And it's difficult, I think, for all of us. But so what we're trying to do is we've created some newsletters. We've sent at least one newsletter out, another one's shortly going out. We've developed we're trying to set up webinars. So this is our first example. So if the technology doesn't completely work, we'll certainly get it more right next time. Working group meetings, we've got a number of working group meetings set up. And then looking ahead as to what we might be doing once the lockdown is over and once we're released from house arrest. So just the next slide, please. So the world's going to change. We need to remember that. It's not going to be the same when we go back. Construction has to change. I think, and again, many of you would know this better than me, but what I read is all sorts of issues are being looked at, companies, and we are always a very creative industry. So I'm sure we'll find lots of ways of doing things and dealing with the situation. But I think there's only one certainty, I think, and that is that we're all going to have costs squeezed by everything that's happened. So we absolutely need to be more efficient. And I think that's an area where getting it right, as we all know, if we actually really do get it right, we could actually save a lot of money. So that's a really important point. So next slide, please. So we waste, as you've seen this slide many times, £22 billion a year. And that's something that we really, it's an easy gain if we could actually sort ourselves out and work in a more productive fashion. So moving on again, please. So as I've always said, this is about getting it right from the start. Of course, we need to verify that things are right. That's absolutely correct. But the first thing is not to make the mistakes in the first place, not to waste time doing something, then finding out that it's wrong, and then putting it right. We're about getting it right from the start. And the next slide, please. So our current membership is about 50 members, and you can see the range of members that we have. We've got at least 2 new members here, well, as far as I could see from the people who've joined. We've got IFC, International Fire Consultants, and that's Hugh Foster and Andy Mulholland from Amcrete. So that's 2 new members that have joined since the last time we were together. So that's great, and welcome to you, and welcome to all of the rest of you. And again, thank you for all of your support. So with that, I'm now going to move on to NIC Francis, basically. So Nick.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Tom. Thanks a lot. Can we unshare screen, please, Helena?
Did that work?
No.
That's strange.
There we go. I can see everyone again.
Yeah.
Hello, hello. Right, what we're going to do now is we're going to try and answer a question, which is, what on earth is going on? And it's probably something many of us have asked several times over the last month. You know, we find ourselves in a pretty unprecedented situation, and all of us are spread all around the country. And what I'd like to do now for this first bit of the session is to put you into breakout groups so that you can share your experiences. You can sort of think of this as a therapy session, possibly. But what I'd like you to do is, first of all, just introduce yourselves so that you know who you're talking to, and then try and answer 3 questions. So the first question is, what is it that consumed you or your company at the start of this COVID-19 crisis? So you can think of that as so far. What is it that has consumed your company so far? The next question is, what is it that you're focusing on? What is consuming all your effort now? And then the third question is, what do you think is the biggest pitfall that's waiting for us on the other side? What is your main concern as we start to emerge out of or through this? So, future. So just try and, as a group, come up with what is the one thing that consumed you at the beginning, the one thing that's consuming you now, and the one thing you're most concerned about in the future. So if I can ask, I think Tom's controlling it, so maybe if you could put people into their breakout groups. You're going to have 5 minutes in your breakout group. I think you'll get a warning, but keep an eye on your watch as well. So you have 5 minutes, and then at the end, we'll ask you each to type your answers into the box, and we'll see what we've come up with. So I'll see you all on the other side in 5 minutes. Hopefully you got something out of those discussions, at least talking to other industry professionals who maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. What I'd like to do though now is not to sum up the whole thing, but just to look at that final question. And if I can ask you please all to open up the chat box, and in the chat box, just write down the one thing that you think is your company's main concern longer term. So Cliff, there you've put business as usual for many business areas. Maybe you can unmute yourself and just talk about what you mean by that, Cliff.
The last question is, I was just typing in, was a concern that as is normal in the construction industry, unfortunately, with all the litigious nature of things, that there will be some debates about what the legal implications are of the delays that are inevitably going to occur to the construction projects and how they are going to be dealt with. And I think I'm concerned that people may revert to type. It would be great if everyone comes out of it with this great collaboration that's going on during the crisis, but I just wonder, perhaps I'm being a little bit negative there,
yeah,
that won't carry through when people start looking at the bottom line as regard their construction contracts.
Brilliant, thank you. And Martin, I can see that you've mentioned about restarting sites. Maybe you can unmute yourself and just make a comment about what you see that being.
Okay, well, I think the main concern here, you know, within our organisation is the fact that you've probably used up all of your, some subcontractors have carried on working and you've used up materials where they had it available. Some subcontractors haven't been working, and you're going to need to work out how you're going to get all the new subcontractors back in the work order that they were working in the past, with all the right materials in place at the right time.
Right, yeah. And someone there has written the perfect storm, which is interesting. Who was it that said that? Oh, it's Linton. Hello, hi Linton. Yeah, so you've mentioned a perfect.
Yeah. I think we're just talking in our group, and one of the things that's certainly concerning me is that we've been so busy trying to keep things going for all the right reasons that actually we've been concentrating on the welfare and the safety things, and quite rightly that we should do. But in doing that, actually, we've taken our eye off the ball in terms of, you know, potentially getting things wrong. That we're only going to realise that we've done that when we sort of come out the other side, or sometime down the line, and we've spent a lot of time and effort making lots of mistakes.
Interesting. Okay, so that leads on very nicely. Thank you for that, Linton. It was almost like it was placed, to us looking at our root causes of error. So clearly we know that GIRI has done a lot of research into the root causes of error. So this is where we'll go on to the next part, and we'll just have a look at those root causes first. So I've jotted on the screen on the board here some of the things that we picked out. So race to the bottom, robustness of supply chain, problems restarting, the perfect storm for error, introducing new protocols, a collapse in productivity. So these are all the things we've just identified. So let's now look at the root causes that GIRI research found. So test of arm strength. There we go. So this is the list that I imagine most of you will probably recognise. So from the research, what industry up until now, before this crisis, identified as the root causes of errors in construction. So we start at the bottom with, in at number 10 was poor supervision, then poor communication between team members, poor management of interfaces, cost and time pressures down here at number 7. Buildability, so designing for construction or not designing for construction, poor coordination of design and design errors, and then a poor quality culture at number 4. And any of you who've done the training, I'm sure you'll remember the top 3. So we've got poor communication of design, late design changes, and inadequate planning. Now, what I think is really interesting is for us to take this list and say, how does this apply to us now? Because the situation when we came up with this list was obviously very different to the situation we're in now. So what I'm going to do is we're all going to play a bit of a higher or lower game. So if I can ask you please to hold your hands out in front of you and wiggle them if you've got the dexterity to do so. Now, if they're in the middle of the screen, that means that the, here you go, who's that? That's Bill. I can't see your fingers wiggling. Thank you. So that if you're in the middle of the screen, that means that you think the situation is about the same as it was before. So it's about the same. If you think the situation is less bad, it's less of a problem, we do that, so that it's less of a problem than it used to be. If it's more of a problem, do that, and that means it's more of a problem than it's used to be. So what we're going to do is look through each of these, and I'd like you all, please, and you can all flick through so you get each other on a grid display, and we'll have a look at who thinks these are more of a problem, less of a problem, or about the same. So thanks, Cliff, that's great, very enthusiastic there. So we'll start off with poor supervision, so supervision of works on site. If you think that's going to be the same here, or what does everyone think? Is it going to be more of a problem, less of a problem? So, okay, most people are looking about, oh, we've got a few, we've got mostly the same and a few worse. Okay, so I'm going to say that's a little bit worse. So I'm going to draw a slight up arrow for that one. So there we go. There's an arrow pointing slightly upwards. Let's have a look at poor communication. Do you think communication between team members is going to be about the same, or more of a problem, or less of a problem? So less of a problem from Cliff. So about the same, more of a problem, more, less, more, less. Oh, that's interesting. We've got quite a range of answers. Great. So, so poor communication, that actually seemed about the same on average. Clearly, this is not greatly rigorous, but we'll keep going. So let's have a look at the next one, interface management. So do you think the management of interfaces is going to be worse, more of a problem, or less of a problem? So less of a problem, less of a problem, about the same, more of a problem, more of a problem. Yeah, okay, there's definitely more people saying it's more of a problem there. So more of a problem for interface management. Cost and time pressures, more of a problem or less of a problem? Okay, fairly, that one looks unanimous. I'm just flicking through the screen. Yeah, pretty unanimous. Everyone thinks cost and time pressures are going to be much worse. Buildability, consideration of the constructability during design. More of a problem, more of a problem. Okay, again, interesting. That one looks about half and half. So I think that one stays about the same. Design coordination. So how well coordinated the designs are. About the same. Less of a problem. So, okay, we've got more of a problem from Andrew. Less of a problem from Michael. More. Okay, so again, that one looks about the same on average. So we're getting near the top now. Poor quality culture. What do you think of our culture? How much of a focus are we going to be putting on quality? If you think it's going to be more of a problem, okay. Right, this is looking fairly unanimous. Yeah, the vast majority seem to be going it's more of a problem. Okay, so that one's definitely worse. Poor design communication. So the communication of design information, do you think that's going to be better? So we've got one or two think it, so some saying the same, some saying it should be better. Okay, so we've got mostly the same, but a few betters. So that one hopefully can be improving. Late design changes. Do we think this is going to become more of a problem? Late design changes. So we've got less of a problem from Cliff. Okay, pretty much everyone else. Oh no, Michael is saying less, but most other people are saying more or the same. So I think that would be slightly more, but maybe only slightly. We've got a real mix of answers there, which is interesting. And final one, planning, inadequate planning. Do you think that the planning is going to be more or less of a problem? More of a problem, more of a problem. I think Cliff is the optimist amongst us. Mark's definitely thinking more. Okay, about the same, more. Okay, there's a clear majority for more of a problem there. Okay. So that's really interesting. So, and sort of goes back to this idea that Linton was talking about before in terms of the perfect storm. So we've identified that these are the normal root causes of error from the previous research. And actually what this is indicating is that, what have we got? 3 of them are about the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them are worse, and only 1 of them is potentially better. So what we've just shown is that actually the existing root causes of error on average are going to be more prevalent as we come out of this situation. So that's interesting. I think actually the next thing that we need to ask is, are there other things going on or other new root causes that we haven't thought about? So what I'd like you to do, please, is to put you back into breakout groups, and bearing in mind this list, have a think for 5 minutes to identify, are there any other things as we start to emerge from this crisis that are going to be new root causes for stuff to go wrong on site? So can I put you back in your breakout rooms for 5 minutes, and then we'll see what you all come up with. Thank you. Hello and welcome back, everybody. So as people start filtering back in, can I please ask you to open the chat box again and type in one root cause. If you think of a new thing that is going to come and bite us as we start moving out of this current crisis. So if you can open the chat box and start typing in your conclusions, please, from your group. Okay, and Steve, you mentioned use of alternative materials. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. What we see is material supply drying up in one area and people coming up with alternatives under pressure. And people think it's equal or similar approved, but 2 years later it turns out not to be.
Right, okay, so as people try and adapt in this sort of chaotic situation, okay, we've got errors due to purely virtual communications, disruption as some firms fail to survive. Okay, regulatory changes, interesting. And then we've got Emma talked about impact on people. Could you expand on that slightly?
Yeah, hi. I suppose where I'm coming from is whilst the furlough scheme has been really useful because it's helping businesses survive and it's there, in fact, to protect jobs, a lot of staff actually feel that they've been labelled as non-essential. So the impact on them and getting them back into the fold and back up to speed. And then the people who have been told that they are essential and have felt the burden of that and keeping the business going. And as we rightly pointed out, there's lots of clients want us now to accelerate. I don't know if any of you work for Highways England. We're working through Easter, we're working through the bank holidays. So the pressure of burnout on people. So there, I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact that is going to have on the industry. So that's probably where I'm coming from.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that. So just skim reading through this list here, it looks to me like there are probably two things that are really coming out strong. One relates to people, so losing people because they've been laid off, or maybe they've lost their competence because they've not worked for a long time. So all stuff around our people, and also a lot of mentions of supply chain. So supply chain not being there, materials not being available. So that definitely seems like a theme. What I'd like to do now is just to ask all of you to try and put a number to what you think the difference will be when we go back. So at the moment, we know that about £22 billion a year is wasted through error. And what I'd ask you to do is in the chat box, type in a number. If you think that the typical cost of error is going to be about the same, type in number 1, so 1.0. If you think it's going to be double, type in 2. If you think it's going to be 10% more, type in 1.1. If you think it's going to be 90%, then 0.9. So does everyone know what I mean to put a number to it? So we've got, there we go, 1.2, 1.2, 1.5. 1.2s, 1.5s, 0.9. Who's the optimist? Okay, we've got 2 there from Helen. Wow, that's okay. So using my computer-like brain, I'm going to quantify 30 data points and average them instantaneously. And I'm going to say that it looks like we're hovering around 1.3-ish. You know, I might be completely wrong, but it looks like on average, we're saying that we're about 1.3. So that is 1.3 times 22. I've set myself up for a fall here, haven't I? So that would be, what's 3 times 22? 66. So 8.6. So we're looking at possibly £6 to £7 billion worth of additional error, just based on your feedback then. So we said that there are these extra things. We know that these are a bit of a perfect storm. These are the extra things that might be going on. And we think, ballpark figure, that that's probably going to cost us £6 or £7 billion. Not scientific, but fairly scary nonetheless. So I think that leads on to really the next question of so what, which is what can we do about it? And I think that, you know, Tom and I certainly would say, what can GIRI do to help you address this problem? And I think it's worth thinking about this in two ways. One is, what can we do now to help you survive the current crisis? And what can we do slightly longer term to help you thrive as we get through it? So I think we'll run this just as a large chat.
Nick, could I just interrupt for a moment? Some of you may have read an article in New Civil Engineer in the last 2 weeks, which talked about people spending time checking their designs, planning better, use the time that we've got at the moment. And if you go back to many of the discussions that we had earlier on about GIRI, it was all about we need to find time to plan, to do things better. Right now, we're all forced to stop the day-to-day construction, but it is an opportunity for us to actually plan, redesign, check our design, check our interfaces, all of those things, stating the blindingly obvious. But the one thing we have got at the moment is time. Back to you, Nick.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I've heard people referring to this as the Great Pause, much in the nature of the Great Depression or the Great War. We're now in the Great Pause, which, yeah, is possibly an opportunity for us. Okay, so the two questions we're going to ask really are, what can GIRI do to help you survive? And what can we do to help you thrive afterwards? So can we just have an open forum? If people can use the chat box to type in any suggestions, but also please feel free to unmute yourself and just contribute to the group. On that first question, what would you think is most beneficial from GIRI now? So Andy's reinforcing that point from Tom, that we can use the time to do proper deep design reviews. Anyone else got a...
Yeah, we might be able to do that, but I think one of the issues is around whether everybody is keeping more resource available and on task. And people have talked about furlough. I think quite a lot of people have gone, we don't know how long we're in this for. There's only so much money. And we're not necessarily giving ourselves more time to do things, because is there the money?
That's interesting. So the point is, we might have the time, but if the money's not there with it, we can't pay people to do stuff. Okay. Anyone else got a comment on that?
The time that's been presented to us is fine, as long as we haven't furloughed the people who are necessary for planning, redesigns, and so forth. But it's quite often the case, and I've seen it, where I'm requesting information or clients are requesting information, and the response is, as soon as the lockdown is eased, then we will pick up the issue and provide the information. So, you know, when people are furloughed and they're at home, a lot of people are reluctant to do any work because they're not actually going to get paid for it, or believe they're not going to get paid for it. So that's an issue.
Yeah, interesting.
I think.
Sorry, go on. Yep.
I was going to say, I think there is a sort of general concern where companies have furloughed staff to protect the business, that those staff really cannot be working as such, because there's a risk of an audit as such, and you know, well, actually they weren't furloughed, they were working. So, and it would be very difficult for a business to perhaps see the value of investing their time now going forward.
Okay, and can I just ask Steve Clark, you mentioned about startup and ramp up guidance. Could you possibly expand on that?
Yeah, so I think it's what people are looking for is some sort of guidance on how they can start up and ramp up the production on site as smoothly and as carefully as possible, rather than trying to rush into it and trying to, you know, go full steam ahead. There's a case of, right, okay, let's do it in a safe, controlled way. but also making sure that we do it very, very productively. And really, I think that's what people are looking for, some guidance. And it's sometimes when you're in a crisis, you don't see the obvious, and it's easy, it's easier for someone to come and give guidance and advice from the outside and say, look, these are the things that you should be considering and should be working on. And sometimes, quite often, it is literally, common sense. But when you're amongst it and delivering and trying to produce, you can't see common sense. So I think it's some sort of guidance as far as these are the things that you should be considering before you start production, and also when you start up on site again.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. Now, can I just ask you now to think about that second part of the question, which is, as we emerge from this, so assuming that we are restarted.
Sorry, excuse me, Nick.
Sorry, yeah, fine.
Beamer, yeah. Just before we move on, I think Mark was quite right in that if furloughed staff cannot do any work as such, but what they are allowed to do is training and development. So for me, I think there's an opportunity actually for GIRI, and particularly your e-learning, which is free to members or a certain amount of days. All this can be rolled out to furloughed staff. So we can't mandate them to train, but we can nudge and encourage. And actually, I think if that's delivered in a certain way, that will make people feel still part of the business and more secure. So I think there is something that GIRI can do straight away. And I will just say that I'm delighted to see some of my colleagues on here today, because they do and have made the time to come into this session. So I think we don't have to push it an open door here. Just let's see if we can get the GIRI training out to teams who are on furlough.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. That's really useful. So the next question is about longer term. So after stuff has restarted, is there anything particular that you identify that would be useful for that? So anyone in the chat box or anyone wants to make a quick contribution on longer term, what you think would be valuable as we recover and then thrive?
It's Helen Sulu here. I think it would be important to actually bring some of the things that we are discussing today up, and with communications through LinkedIn or through other ways, or the newsletter, to make companies aware about the importance of some of the new challenges they're going to face.
Okay.
Also the possibility of having increased errors on site because of these issues. Because at the moment, my sense is that nobody's thinking about, it's easy to cut prevention, and it's easy to cut things that are helping out because they're in a crisis mode. I think we need to bring that out and make people aware about the implications of doing that.
Brilliant. Okay, and it's interesting because actually a few people have mentioned, both in the chat box and now, that a big drive is the awareness and the understanding. Right, well, I think we're rapidly approaching the end. So what I'd like to do, maybe if I can hand back to you, Tom, if you're happy to wrap us up.
So I'm just going to finish again by thanking you all for coming, thanking you for listening, thanking you for your time. Thank Nick for what he's done. I hope you found that useful, and thank Helena for pulling it all together and managing managing all of the technology, which most of the time went pretty well. So thanks very much indeed for joining us, and we'll be in touch. Basically, that's great. Thanks very much.